All right. Okay. Sharon, welcome.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for donating your time to a worthy cause. We appreciate it. So Richie, will you start us off, please?
I will do it. So because of the continuation of the COVID-19 pandemic, this meeting is being held electronically over the Zoom platform. It is authorized by the county's declaration of local emergency, the county's continuity of government ordinance, this authority's resolution, and Virginia Code section 2.2-3708.2 subsection A3. The authority directors are not physically present at a single central location, as it is unsafe or impractical to do so because of the pandemic in the county's declaration. The authority directors are participating electronically. This meeting is being held according to section 6 of the county's continuity of government ordinance. Public has real-time audiovisual access to this meeting over Zoom and real-time audio access over telephone. Both is provided in the lawfully posted meeting notice. Public is also invited to offer live comment during this meeting's public comment period. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. Anyone interested in commenting should use the raise hand feature. If you're listening by telephone, please use the *9 feature to notify the facilitator. All speakers must identify themselves and the magisterial district where they live or have a business. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the county's website. So with that, I'll do roll call and ask each director to identify themselves and their general location. So Jay Fennell.
Present and my residence in the Whitehall district.
Peter Taylor.
President in my residence in the Rivanna district.
Sherry Buttrick. Sherry, oh, you're muted.
Senate Republic of Whitehall.
Let's see, Hamilton Moses.
At home in North Garden in the Samuel Miller.
David Emmett. I didn't see him. Is he
He's
here?
not here today.
No.
Okay. Jenny Moore.
I'm here at my home in Crozet.
John Moore.
At my residence in Sam Miller District.
Rose Emery. Did Rose make it?
No, she's in California or something.
And
She was planning to attend electronically, but I'm not sure she was able to pull it off.
All right, and so we have a new member, Sharon Merrick.
Home office, Ravenna District.
All righty, Mr. Chair, we have a quorum and we can proceed.
Excellent. Start off. So other matters not listed on the agenda, is this where we're typically taking public comment at the time?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I don't see Rex on the list anywhere of participants, so don't imagine there are any public comments out there. Again, Sharon, welcome. John and Jenny, our newest member also. Sharon, it's good to see you two here. Let's move on to approval of last meeting's minutes. Hoping everybody's had a chance to read them.
And I just wanted to mention there is one minor change to the minutes. I had left out that Sherry had recused herself from the stressor item on the December 9th meeting, and that's now in the draft minutes. So I don't know if you want to include that change in your motion.
All right. Anybody have a motion?
I'll move that we accept them.
Thank you, Dr. Moses. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
We'll need to do a roll call vote.
Okay, any discussion? Are we set?
The motion was as amended, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, roll call vote.
Director Fennell,
Aye.
Director Taylor,
Aye.
Director Buttrick,
Aye.
Director Moses,
Aye.
Director Jenny Moore,
Aye.
Director John Moore,
Aye.
and Director Merrick.
Aye.
Right, so the motion passes.
All right. So next we move on to, we find ourselves in March, electing this year's officers. We've had any nominations?
I would
I'll
be,
move.
Mr. Moses?
yes, I would be pleased to renominate you as chair and Peter Taylor as vice chair, should you two be willing to continue to hold the significant burdens of high office.
Second.
All right, Mr. Taylor, how do you feel about that?
That worked for me.
All right, works for me too.
To be bureaucratic about it, we also need to have a nomination for secretary.
All
By
right,
all means, we'll include that on the slate.
And the secretary does not have to be a member of this board.
If Scott Clark is willing to continue to serve, it would be ideal.
And both willing and required.
Second.
all right, well, there's our slate. Is there any discussion? Okay, I guess we put it to a vote.
Do we
Wanna do
all
roll
vote
call?
on this, or do we recuse ourselves to the extent we're involved?
Right.
It's a democracy. You can vote for yourself.
You
Right.
can also vote against yourself if you
Yeah,
wish.
you may want to put up an alternate. But it won't pass, so just carry on.
I think it's fate if there are no other nominations, so, but
Tis.
we can do a voice vote.
All right.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? All right, congratulations.
Thank you.
All right.
Get off to a good start for 2022 then. Forward to it.
All right.
All right, Scott, take it away.
Thank you very much. Sharing the screen. All right, we've already done all of that. Okay, thank you for covering those items so quickly. We have two main items on the agenda tonight, and I have updates on each of them to give you in addition to the materials I sent out previously. So just a little bit of extra time for each one. First one is the music hall request for a dwelling size increase. And Mr. Manning, the landowner, and Mr. Blaine, his attorney, are both here to answer questions. So that would be helpful. So the background is this is an ACE program easement. Purchase of development rights easement was recorded back in April of 2007 on 76 acres on Stony Point Pass. It permits one main dwelling no more than 7,000 square feet unless there is prior written approval for more, and two accessory dwellings. In my report to you, I had said that there were two existing dwellings in the property. This is not correct. The larger of the two dwellings that I marked as existing is no longer there and was demolished after being damaged. So it's actually just the one smaller dwelling that's on the site now. So here's the property, just to show you an aerial view. You can see this is the site of the dwelling that's no longer there. This is the small cottage that's still there. And so the current request is for a new dwelling of approximately 12,800 square feet in this location on this high spot here. This particular deed does not identify specific avoidance areas, which is typical for ACE easements, especially the older ones. The proposed location does not impact critical slopes, stream buffers, floodplains, or designated mountain protection areas. The property as a whole is located in the Southwest Mountains Rural Historic District. Proposed location is at the highest point of the property, but is only slightly above the elevations of the two prior dwellings. Just to give you a rough idea, this is a architect's sketch giving the location, again, on that open hilltop at the northwest side. And just to clarify what you're seeing here, it looks like you've got building close to the property line, but you don't. This is parking areas in a garage. This is the part that's the actual dwelling, which is, again, here. So it might at first glance look like there's a setback problem, but there really isn't. Rough sketch of the elevation of the building. And so as far as recommendation, given that these are not final drawings or building permit drawings, staff is going to recommend that the authority permit the dwelling to be up to around 13,000 square feet rather than the 12,802, just in case there are minor changes that occur before we actually receive the building permits here in community development. And Mr. Lauria has provided a resolution for your consideration for any motion you might want to make, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. And again, we've got the landowner and Mr. Blaine here to help as well.
Scott, can you give us a little bit more information about the history of this property and the adjoining properties, please?
In what sense? I'm sorry.
Well, are there other conservation easements nearby?
There are. This property on the southwest side of the easement, I realize now is somewhat hidden by my text block, but this is an easement property here. And then there's one nearby to the northeast. And then if you look on the location map at the bottom right there, you'll see that all those green areas are properties that are under existing easements.
Are those properties held by the same or related parties?
I believe the one that's adjacent is a VOF easement. A lot of the ones in that area are VOF easements rather than easement authority.
I don't think that was the question.
You asking about ownership?
Yes. Does this landowner or a related party have adjacent property?
Oh, I don't believe so.
The VOF Castalia easement that I believe is adjacent to this is owned, as far as I understand, by the same family. It may not be the same legal LLC entity, but I believe it's the same family, if not the same persons.
Well, this acceptance of a property that is almost double the size that was originally approved would set a precedent for the authority, in that we've never accepted an easement for a dwelling of this size. And in fact, when we've approached it up to, I think, 10 or perhaps 11,000 square feet, we've insisted that the size be reduced. Now, the fact that one of the dwellings that was on the property is no longer there, was that demolished or was it destroyed?
I understand it was demolished. It wasn't salvageable and was removed.
Well, one question for the owner is, what is the intention to do with that dwelling, and would that be extinguished as part of this transaction? But even without that, the issue is that we've never approved on a conserved land property a dwelling of this size. And the reason for that is clear, that in general, large dwellings are not consistent with a conservation purpose. Pure and simple.
Yeah, yes, this is Brian Manning, the landowner, and I appreciate all of your time and, frankly, your time spent on this committee. I think that this Louisa Road is one of the most beautiful and, frankly, cherished pieces of Virginia land that there is, and is as wonderful in the Southwest Mountains probably there is in the country. And we want to be absolute good stewards, the same as all of you have been for the, in a lot of cases, generations that you've had, the properties that you live on and care for. From our perspective around the size, really, we want to build a home that both looks like it could have been on this property for 100 years inside of that, with that could be here for 100 years and will be here in the future for 100 years. My wife and I just began our family. My son is a month and day old today. We're very happy. We celebrated his birthday, his 1 month birthday yesterday. And our largest hope and intention for this property, this land, and our family is to go out there and have this be the home that we raise our family in, make all of our memories in, and then when we inevitably pass on, follow the great tradition of this road and continue the next generation to make their memories in this home as well. I understand your concerns of going over the size easement, and that is 100% what this committee is for. It is for making sure this land stays as beautiful and as pristine as it is. And I want to assure you that the home we intend to build is going to fit the property and do it justice to how gorgeous of a piece of land that it is.
Thank you. I've got two concerns. I'll echo what Dr. Moses said, but also that, when the Chesters originally gave the donation, the 7,000 square foot was in keeping with their, it seemed, I interpreted it as in keeping with their intentions of how they wanted the property treated. And to change their gift down the road may not be honoring their initial intentions of the gift in the first place.
And I do think, Jay, that the request is not to amend the easement, but that the terms of the actual easement say 7,000 square feet
with our permission.
Approval for larger.
Right.
I mean, that said, I have a little concern about how much larger here, but
right.
I think that it was always contemplated that perhaps it could be approved for larger.
Yeah, and I understand that. It's just almost doubling it. Just
yeah. I mean, there's a sense of spirit, but I think in terms of the text, it's okay.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that there's wiggle room, but this is a very, very big wiggle. That's what it is.
And this was a purchased easement through the ACE program?
Yes, that's
It was.
correct.
Yeah.
And what did the county pay for this easement?
I have noted the consideration being $309,760. And to be clear, permission is needed from this body and also the Board of Supervisors.
Okay. We don't have any idea yet. They want to know from us what we think first, right?
You always go to the authority first.
Okay.
All right.
I would point out, as a nearby landowner and a resident of this area for a long time, that this notion of house sizes has not been part of the easement discussion for a long time. And in fact, if you look at this area, many of the historic homes exceed 7,000 square feet, including the one I live in, substantially, and have been here for a long, long time and are also in conservation easements. So it's hard for me to see how this would be inconsistent with the character of the Southwest Mountains Historic District. Again, if you look at most of the properties along the road, almost all of which are in conservation easements, this would not be really an outlier in terms of size. So I think that, preserving the character of an area is important, but I don't see this as as inconsistent. And again, just speaking for myself, I think that the house I'm looking at right now is roughly the same size, and has been here for a long, long time. And
Thank
in
you.
conservation easement.
Thanks, Mr. Taylor. You know, I
The
think one of the
acreage
things,
for this easement, the Chester easement is, is it about 80 acres?
76. so
76, okay.
just below the 40 per dwelling threshold.
Well,
if you
no,
count
not
that
really. It's
small-
actually way
you count-
above because there's 3. Or there,
Yeah,
Or
that
is
40
it-
threshold is something we apply to the donated easements. It's not really part of the ACE program.
right, but just
Got
for his FYI thinking.
Yeah.
So are there aspects of it, because I don't know, this is interesting because it seems like the ACE templates and our templates do differ in some regards.
And this is an older easement that's an outdated template.
Right. And we're merely just giving permission. So we're not really messing with the easement in the first place. The other direction I kind of wanted to head was that is use. That if this became a tasting room or an Oktoberfest beer hall, there would be great heartburn within the conservation community. And if there could be assurances there that this was, you know, that it's that non-commercial use and it doesn't fall under the beer and wine farmer, you know, the farming aspect, that it truly is a single family dwelling as its use, I would feel more comfortable with this.
Put that a different way, I think that this body would be reassured if you were to extinguish any right to rebuild the structure that was demolished, and that there would be tighter language in in addition to this easement that would restrict the use of that building that you are proposing to build, as well as no commercial use for the property.
I think that sounds like, from my perspective, I think that sounds tremendously fair. You know, I want, you know, that we have no intention of this being a commercial dwelling. We wholeheartedly want this to be our home. And so.
Yes, but Mr. Manning, the responsibility of this body is for a public purpose. It is not to approve an architectural plan or to second guess what you or you may not wish to do. It is for successive owners in perpetuity. And as Peter Taylor pointed out, the very large buildings, large farms that have been built historically were at a time when there was much less density in Albemarle County. This was truly a farming area. And that's what our responsibility is to maintain.
I wonder, since this is an old easement, Richie, to what degree do we even have to worry that this single family dwelling could be converted to commercial purposes? Is it pretty much dealt with in the existing language?
I mean, I think the risk is that the building is converted to agricultural use, and is no longer a dwelling. And so what I'm hearing, if we're going to put further restrictions on it, then I think we're looking at changing the easement.
Mr. Chairman, if I might add, I think that I understand my client is amenable to making a commitment, a long-term commitment, that the use would not be converted to what some would view as a commercial, but I think the point just made is that a tasting room could be viewed as an agricultural use.
Right.
I think your options would be, we would consider amending the easement, but I wonder, and I guess I'd defer to your counsel, if your approval cannot be conditioned upon a commitment from the owner that the use would not be converted. And that's what I've heard Mr. Manning say.
Thank you. And, you know, it's a lot of times what we deal with is that the intentions of the people donating, we hear them loud and clear, and we're protecting the properties against the intentions of 2 and 3 owners down the road also.
Absolutely. You know, the irony in looking at this easement, and I know it's an early generation easement, is it it talks about the square footage limitation of the main dwelling, but it has no limitation on the size of the accessory dwellings. That's not, that's not an avenue that we consider pursuing, but we know that we've, over the generations of these easements, we've improved them, and I think we've tightened them pretty well. But, I'm hearing my client willing to accept an approval with conditions that address your concerns.
Thank you.
And I will add one caveat is that this easement does include the requirement that any improvements, they still need to not impair a conservation purpose.
That's
So
right.
there's still that overlying that overlying notion that if there is a offered or intended building, it still has to fall within, it still has to preserve the conservation values on the property.
Thank you, Richie.
And in the
I may be
recitals,
new, but I do have some questions.
go ahead, Sharon.
Please, Sharon.
I just have some questions that maybe are for Brad, and I'm new here, but I am very familiar with the property. And I know that a lot has changed with the terrain and so forth. And a couple of things, Brad, when I look at what you submitted with the citing of the footprint, just had a couple of questions. If that's going to set up at the 580 elevation foot, looks like there's a bald up there on the top of the mountain. If I stand on the road on Stony Point on 600, that's about a 510 elevation. So as you know, it's a pretty steep in grade up there. And if you build upon that a 2-story house, maybe you're adding 10-foot ceilings on the first, maybe 9 on the second. So if I'm standing on the road and I'm looking up, I'm trying to get a feel of, I'm going to see it and what kind of impact it might have from a visual being 13,000 square feet. So when I look at the footprint that you submitted, it seems to me if you were to turn it like clockwise, a quarter turn, then the long part of the building is fronting more so the mountains. And what you would see from the roadside from Stony Point is maybe more of the narrow side. So visually, you have less building in your view shed.
Thank you, Sharon. That's a really good point. It also reminds me of other properties that we've put under easement that are in the Monticello view shed also, and the restrictions on those in terms of muted or organic color tones. So they don't have it's not a huge white building on top of a mountain, but it's something that blends into the natural flora and fauna.
I mean, I was thinking based on where this property is, Scott, I was thinking you wouldn't see it, but Sharon's point about elevation, would we see it? Would we
would
see it from
definitely-
22? I mean, that would be my biggest concern.
Brian,
You're not going to see
Brian,
it from
would you want to
22
address
because
that?
it's 231 and Stony Point.
Yeah. Hey, Brian, do you have something do you want to add?
Yes, these are great points, and we really want to respect the views of the road from both 231 as well as Stony Point. From 231, the only area that you'll be able to see the property, we've gone out there and walked the line both on the road as well as on the property, there is that fairly large hill at the edge towards town of the Castalia property. I think the eastern side of the Castalia property, that hill right there. Do you all know what I'm speaking towards?
Yes.
Yeah.
From the top of that hill until that driveway at the eastern edge of Castalia, you have probably that 30-yard area where you would be able to see the top of the hill. However, once you go down that hill, you would not be able to see the home again. and then on the Stony Point Pass side, from the bottom of that hill, we are going to intentionally tuck the home a little deeper away from that gradient, that sharp gradient, just for sake of having a home, having a yard, and then not having the kids fall down the sledding hill. We would hopefully tuck it further away from that gradient. So when you did look up, you would not get the entire broadside of the home.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I make?
Mr. Taylor first, and then you, Dr. Moses.
So my position for a long time has been that this body does not need to get into the color business or the architectural business. I think to do so is a fool's errand. It's whatever decisions we make are not likely to be along the lines of color and architecture, are not likely to be enforced over time. And I don't think it's the mission of this body to opine on colors and so forth. It's really the conservation purposes of this land as it relates to eliminating development rights and perhaps the ecological nature of the property. So I have always had heartburn on when we start talking about color and whether the house is twisted to the left or the right. I think we're going down a path that will ultimately get conservation easements in general in trouble, and specifically our body in trouble as well.
Yeah, I would agree with what Peter's saying. I'm of two minds about this, and my hesitancy to some degree probably picks up a little of what Chip is saying, which is just kind of a matter of scale. If this were 400 acres, I would be a lot less concerned about it. I am concerned about the visibility from 231-22, which I had not even contemplated could be a possibility because it's, quite a bit down Stony Pass Road. Sorry, Scott.
To answer that, I'm sorry, I had to go away for a second and check the GIS. The proposed building site is about 3,000 feet from Louisa Road and only about 100 feet higher. So it seems unlikely that it would be particularly prominent.
Okay.
From that far back.
Okay, I just assumed you had looked into that, so.
We tend to focus on how these
basically
buildings impact the property.
That's good to know. That's great to know. But I agree with Peter, we shouldn't get into the minutia of, designing and planning houses. It's nice to see, Mr. Manning, your plan, and it looks attractive, and you're kind to produce it, but I don't think we have to bless it. I do have a little bit of concern just about scale. This is, I think, the biggest house we have seen on an easement. Maybe Scott would correct me. But we also, on under 80 acres, have the ability to have 3 houses. And those two things combined, I think, just give me at least some pause. I mean, I think it's reasonable to ask that the house be approved for somewhat larger than the threshold size. I mean, it obviously was contemplated that that could occur, but I just have some concern about scale, that we could address it a number of ways. I'd be happy with approval for larger for a slightly not quite as larger number. I don't know how far down the road all these design plans are. And or contemplating putting a size limit by virtue of amendment on secondary and maybe giving up one of the secondaries to memorialize the demise of the music hall house, which I remember very fondly and which was a contributing structure to the historic district. And I was very sad to hear it has died. So anyway, I mean, I'm of two minds about this, and those are my concerns, and it could be addressed in a number of different ways.
All right. Mr. Manning?
Yeah, from our perspective, we want to make sure we assuage any concerns. We would be open to diminishing or diminishing the two dwellings or excluding one of the dwellings that is currently available to us. So we want to make sure that everyone feels very comfortable, and we're happy to discuss any alternatives that you all can come up with.
All right, I'm not asking for a solid motion here. It's more just kind of to start out a scaffolding of kind of the information that we have and where are we, just a starting point in terms of discussing no rebuilding of just extinguishing one of those secondary dwellings and diminishing size of the new dwelling. Does anybody have any thoughts?
I would add to that a tighter description of commercial use, so there is no potential for conversion in the future or agricultural related commercial use. And also I would wish to see on a property of this size with a structure that is larger, a very tight restriction on accessory buildings, non-dwellings, but farm buildings.
Okay, so it sounds like we've got 4 points to a potential motion. Sherry, you look like you're chewing on something.
I'm just wondering about very tight restriction on, I'm just wondering about changing what we've already got on non-residential outbuildings or farm buildings.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking, what is it, 4,500 square feet is the sort of the threshold thing? Is that the usual, Richie?
So that's the usual. I was going back to the.
Is that what's in there? Just because it is the usual.
That's what's in it. Farm buildings or structures, no farm building or structure shall exceed a structural footprint of 4,500 square feet unless prior written approval. There's not a limitation on numbers.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm not uncomfortable with that. Of course, if you want to use a 12,000 square foot former house for a barn, might require approval.
The big chicken coop.
I've seen cattle in a lot of old houses, but I'm not sure that that's what's getting ready to happen here.
No.
I would suggest if the general consensus is to change the easement and to add certain restrictions. I don't have any concerns over making the easement more restrictive. I think that complies with Virginia law pretty easily. But I guess my suggestion would be to have Mr. Manning and Mr. Blaine work with Scott Clark to come up with a proposal, just so that, we're not coming back multiple times, negotiating or refining it, but we have something that we can bring to the board, because we still have to go to the Board of Supervisors. This is step one.
Right.
I have to.
Dr. Moses.
Yeah, I have to just point out to everyone, we are going to be making a stamp of approval that will go to the supervisors. And we have to be able to say that anything that we approve is consistent with the intention of the ACE program when this was donated as an ACE easement and purchased by the county. And a large structure is not a conservation use of a property that was intended to keep a farm in a family operating as agriculture. This is a very far departure from the intention of that program.
It's a valid point.
Yeah, we've got, it's a question of optics here as much as anything else. And, I think if we're going to even contemplate approving a structure of this size, and I know the easement says it can, with further approval, it can be larger than 7,000 square feet, but doubling that is, I expect a departure from the expectations of the original approvers of this easement. And if we're going to move forward with an approval of any increase in size, it seems to me that there ought to be some sort of give and take here in terms of other permitted dwellings and other structures that not to mention that there's garages that are going to be built according to the sketched out site plan. There's at least several outbuildings already contemplated for this structure. Is that correct, Mr. Manning?
Just one. We have a garage that we're gonna have. I believe it's the 3-car garage that'll be attached to the home, or slightly detached from the home.
Okay, so we should take that into consideration in addition to everything else. You know, I don't know how to draw the line here in terms of how much is too much. I know it. I know it sounds like too much, but I don't know what is too much. So we're going to be walking a tightrope here, regardless of what we do.
Well, you know, we bounce back and forth. We bring up building envelopes every once in a while also. That in terms of this proposed structure plus what's there already is enough for this piece of property. If nothing else comes along, I feel like that would honor the open space easement as well, instead of having multiple 4,500 square foot potential farm buildings being able to be put in there too.
Is there anything in the recitals in terms of conservation values that are called out in the easement that that a structure this size would be in conflict with? Do we know, Richie? What's the purpose of the easement other than the extinguishment of development rights?
I mean, it's in the rural historic district. I don't think people thought visibility from you know, the scenic road would be an issue, but that if it were, that might be an issue. Being in the historic district and being surrounded by, or at least bordered by, other easements, and then having a huge chunk of this whole Keswick, Southwest Mountains rural historic district chunk of conservation easements is like one of the hugest in the state. And I would assume that much of the purpose was, you know, tacking onto that. I mean, I did chair the ACE committee even unto this distantly past year. So I have
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
I will say the stated goals are one, as Sherry has stated. Additionally, it speaks to protecting the stream channels, maintaining biological functions and drainage, protecting surface drinking water supplies, groundwater resources, ecological communities. So there's the biodiversity angle to it. Generally, the preserving the open space, rural character of the county, maintain the comprehensive plan with agriculture and forestal.
Well, the irony is not lost on me that almost all of the significant contributing structures in the Southwest Mountains Rural Historic District are grand old homes. And that in 100 years or 200 years, maybe this would be considered, in looking back, to be just that. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it is an interesting irony, if nothing else. But that said, as I said earlier, you know, I think we've got a problem or an issue of optics here, and whether or not something like this comports with the original intent and what the county thought it was getting when it paid $300 and some odd thousand for this easement.
Well, and I don't want to neglect to add that it indicated that there were 13 division rights on the property. And it stated that it could result in the establishment of 13 dwelling units on the property. At the time of the granting of the easement, there were 2 dwelling units on the property. And of course, we've already talked about that it would contemplate the addition of 1 more dwelling unit.
Mrs. Merrick,
But
did you
I
have
do,
something to add?
you know, at the time of the donation or the conveyance of the easement, you know, the Chesters were people of modest means. This was a property in an important area with quite a few division rights. And I think that was kind of the intent and the purpose. I'm not sure even the Chesters were, you know, sophisticated agricultural, you know, producers.
And I was looking to see if there was, I know it was mentioned the preservation of agricultural use, and I was looking to see if that was specifically identified in the preambles to the deed, and I don't see that specifically, other than, you know, embracing the general ACE program purposes.
You're looking at the whereas clauses, Richie?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Mrs. Merrick, did you have a comment?
I did, thank you. The comments are saying to increase a 7,000 square foot dwelling to a possible 13,000, and it seems like a big number, and it's an optics. And that is important. And what I just want to bring, when this was placed under the ACE program with the Chesters, they did have 2 homes, music hall, approximately 3,000 square feet, that you could sort of see from Stony Point Road. I'm talking about Route 600. But it was also nestled and hidden behind a lot of trees. And the smaller 1,200 square foot house was kind of nestled back in the trees. Those trees are gone. So not only is Music Hall gone, but the terrain is very different. So when I point out that you now want to go to the highest part of this property, 580, and build 13,000 square feet, I think it's important to address what that will look like and how it will sit. Because if I were just to drive down Route 600 and look up at that hill and go, how did that get there, knowing that was under conservation easement? How did that happen? And so that's why I'm not trying to tell you what color to make it, but I do think what sits there should be somehow acceptable in that view shed, and that means other people on 600 or just driving by, so to speak, because the land has totally changed.
From deforestation? Was it timbered? Or does anyone know the answer?
The property was essentially abandoned as field probably 20 or 25 years ago, and had grown up substantively in kudzu and ailanthus trees. It was, and bamboo, the massive bamboo issue. So it, to my way of thinking, many of the invasive species that were taken over had been eliminated.
Okay. All right, folks, where do we move from here?
I wonder whether, I mean, I think everybody has indicated some thought that give and take is desirable and appropriate, including perhaps Mr. Manning. Maybe we should do him the courtesy of letting him start thinking about the giving and taking rather than our inflicting giving and taking upon him. I mean, I think to recap, I would say that I think we could find our way to this perhaps in a number of different ways. If the approval for larger were not for as larger as this larger, thinking about this as a precedent for other houses we may be asked to approve on similar acreage in the future, I think several members of the authority are kind of nervous about 13,000 on, you know, that acreage, and having everybody else say, well, you gave it to them, you know, we ought to get it too. And then also the fact that there are 3 dwellings, and even in our regular easements that aren't the gift of easement, it's 1 unit per 40 acres or is the threshold, and we're way, this isn't the same as Scott was pointing out, but I think people would be more comfortable with 1 smaller secondary than a secondary dwelling with no threshold size, with no size, and the ability to start from scratch and build a new music hall. So, I think those are the various ways that one could approach this cat. And others may want to add on to that, but I'm thinking maybe it might be the most courteous thing to, having given you at least sort of taken the temperature of this body, for you to think about it and think what is most appealing and best from your standpoint, and come back to us for another discussion.
Just to follow up on that, we have about 35 more minutes of availability of this meeting slot and another meeting covers. I think it's unlikely we'd be able to carry out a successful full negotiation during that time and still get our other work done. So
yeah, and you never want to design a horse by committee during a meeting.
No.
Or, as we all know, a camel results.
Well,
Mr. Manning and Mr. Blaine, do you guys feel like you have a fairly comprehensive grasp or sense of where we would like to head?
Yes, from my perspective, all of your input has been very valuable. What we'll do is we will step away. We will put together our thoughts and come back to all of you with hopefully something palatable and enjoyable for everyone. So we will, but I really appreciate this committee. And this was really our intention, was to just understand where your concerns may lie so that we could, best answer all of them. So thank you all so much for your time and information.
Great.
And I think everybody appreciates, Mr. Manning, your being as receptive and helpful in all of this. And we just want to convey that to you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
all.
We look forward to hearing from you all again.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, Scott. Mount Air. You're on mute.
Since he's muted and I can get a word in edgewise, let the record show that I'm recusing myself from this item because A, I did the original easement with the Kellers, and B, I helped with some requests for amendment recently from the present donors. So I'm not sure that I have a technical conflict, but I'm going to recuse myself just because I think I know probably a lot about it from the VOF point of view.
Understood. Thank you, Ms. Buttrick.
and thank you, Sherry, for covering my technical glitch there that prevented me from. Okay, so the next item is this Mount Air Farm request. And again, I have an update on this one as well. So a little more information in addition to what you saw in your reports. So the basics are that there are 2 adjacent easements on the Mount Air Farm property, 641 acres and 229 acres, done in 98 and 2004. And as you can see here, I won't read all this off again, but these properties do have significant conservation value, just analyzing them as if they had been an easement authority proposal. They meet many of the important criteria that we look at in accepting a property. And because I know it's always of concern, I wanted to lay out the permitted level of development in these easements. The 98 easement, which is the one in red, is 641 acres and has about 13 possible dwellings. On the smaller one, it would be 5. So it's about 1 dwelling per 48 acres. So the proposal that was before you all to talk about was that the current landowner, Mr. Hunter Lewis, who owns this through Pigeon Top LLC, also has, I believe, 4 other easements with the easement authority. And his request was to to both VOF and this authority was to transfer or both of these easements from VOF to the easement authority so that he would have a single body to deal with. Just to clarify, that transfer would require VOF approval, which has not occurred yet. VOF's first step was first instruction to the landowner was to say, before they would consider the transfer, they wanted to be sure that this body was willing to consider the transfer before they went into that process. So what we were going to ask for in terms of an action today was just whether or not you all were willing to give that indication of willingness to consider to VOF for them to then take on the larger process of considering a transfer from one body to another. And the piece I wanted to add was that I became aware in talking to Justin Altus at VOF today that there is some history to this property, and the current landowner had considered some easement amendments and reorientations of the parcels that he had wanted to do with VOF, and that they were not successful in being able to find out a way to do that. Unfortunately, I have never heard from the landowner whether or not he still intends to do that kind of an amendment, changing the boundaries, changing the locations of permitted development. So I'm sorry to say I only found out about the details of this today, and so I don't have a detailed analysis to give you. What I can say, though, is that there seems to be an open question about this property, about the landowner's intent, and whether or not he is only asking to transfer from one holder to another, or whether he also still intends to pursue an amendment. And I think we need to get more details on the history of those past requests from VOF, which Justin has been very kindly providing, but I haven't had time to read through in detail, and also find out from the landowner if his intent has changed or not. So my suspicion is that the authority would prefer to see this again next month after we have more details. But of course, I'm happy to answer any questions and help with any decision you care to make.
Mr. Chairman,
Dr. Moses.
this horse is a non-starter before it leaves the barn, in my view. It is very difficult to understand. We could not even consider it until we have all the information. And just as a general principle, we must be very careful that this body not develop a reputation for being excessively easy to deal with. And I think, as we've reflected before in previous meetings, there is a sense that the easement, that our body is more pliable, shall we say, and receptive to easements or changes to easements that others might not be. It's also not perhaps coincidental that the VOF is enforcing an easement in Albemarle County currently that has received a good deal of attention in the press.
Points.
So I think at minimum, if we're going to look at this, we need to have all of the chapter and verse. We need to look very carefully at the easements as they're written, because they deviate significantly from what we have in the past accepted. And I would say also that it appears to me that effectively this is a subdivision that's been created with exactly what we don't want to see, which is one house on land every 40 or 45 acres that completely changes the rural nature of an area. So that taken in its entirety, we would have to see all of the other properties and what's permitted under them before we could even begin to review these.
Correct. I mean,
Do I need to be more?
No,
Obvious.
you're right, but it's, it is what it is in some regards too, that if they chose not to go with us and decided to activate those dwellings, they could. And, I feel like it might be on us to, if this is you're right. It is a non-starter in some regards. It seems like the intentions are ambiguous, possibly. And I'm curious to see if if he does have intentions that if he ran up against a roadblock with BOF, that he's assuming that he's taking another route to try and push it through with us. But I understand his intentions of wanting to consolidate as well. I don't feel like we have enough information to have a grasp on what's really going on here.
So just to take the other side of this for a second, I don't think it's our position in terms of the question we're being asked to speculate on what Mayor Lewis's intentions are. I think the question we're being asked is, would we accept this easement as a land trust? And it is, the standards for easements have changed. And so I don't know that you could apply current standards to an old easement, but I don't think we can prejudice the situation by saying we think he may want to make changes or do something different. And I think the question we need to ask ourselves is, as it stands today, based on the way this is written, would we as a land trust take over this easement? If there's a change to the easement or a proposal or something else, to me, that's a very separate matter, and that will be taken up on its own merits. And so again, I don't think we're answering the question that we've been asked, is would we take this easement in its current form as a land trust? And
Right. I mean, would we, if it were presented to us like this, would we accept it as an easement on our own?
but Jay, I don't think that's right.
No.
I don't think that.
What I'm saying is that do our standards correspond and apply to this easement? And it seems like they do.
I mean, it's
certainly the resources that are present meet a lot of the authority's acceptance criteria. But as Dr. Moses pointed out, it's an unusual amount of development and possibly an unusual pattern of development for the site. And I suppose one way to approach this would be to say, when I respond to Mr. Lewis, is that the authority wants more information from me on what the potential development pattern is and how it affects the resources, which is the question of the character of the easement itself. But they also want to know from you, Mr. Lewis, we realize that there had been an interest in amending this easement, or do you still intend to pursue an amendment? Or are you satisfied with the layout as it is? And that we need to have both of those kinds of information back before the authority for consideration.
Right. Yeah. So thank you, Scott. Like Mr. Taylor, what I was getting at is that if it's aligned with our easements, that's more palatable in terms of the resources.
Scott, I looked at the two deeds in a cursory detail, and there are some other things that stand out. The latitude for commercial use is much broader than we've accepted before. And they have proposed events up to 100 people, which we've not accepted before, except with one notable exception, and that is the steeplechase site. But there are other terms beside the development pattern.
So just to make my position clear, I think it's perfectly fair, Chip, to say it doesn't meet our standards and therefore we're not going to take it. But I think the question on the table today is intentions notwithstanding, would we take this or not? And if the intentions are different, then that's a separate matter that will come in due course, and whoever holds the easement will say yes or no based on the merits of those changes. But I'm not advocating that we take it. I just think that the question on the table is, what are we being asked? And if in fact there are substantive differences in our language, then I think it's fair to say, we can't take it. But the other thorny part of this is standards change. They've changed materially. So I don't think it's realistic to say and Sherry would have a view on this, but to uphold our current standards on the transfer and easement that was given in whatever it was, 1998 or 6 or whatever it was.
Yeah, 98. Yeah, if we held up one of our own easements dating back then to one of our current ones, we'd have the same issue.
Why would we want to take this on?
Why would we want to take this on?
Why would we want to take on the enforcement responsibility for an easement we didn't write, that doesn't comply to what we'd accept today, and that seems to have a problematic history?
Yeah, that's exactly my issue. I have to say that, I don't think we can second guess what the motivations of the current landowner are. Our responsibility, of course, is to whoever the current landowner might be now or in the future. And I don't sense that we have the strongest stewardship program of a land trust going right now. In other words, we're taking on an awful lot of volume that we don't seem to have the manpower, person power to monitor and uphold. And if this is an easement that we're not that comfortable with in terms of its in terms of the terms, sorry about that, then why would we take on the mantle of being the enforcer for this? I don't get it. I mean, what's in it for us? Nothing.
Right. And I agree. Our staffing issue is seems more important than taking on this piece.
And I will remind the board or the authority that Ches Goodall, he retired, and I'm not aware of plans to replace him anytime in the next fiscal year. I don't know. Scott may have different information. So we are low in terms of staffing, and I don't know when that's going to be fixed.
Yeah, thanks. That's a loss, losing him, especially for Ace also.
Would you, Scott and Richie, would you like a more affirmative verdict from this group so that you can take it back to the landowner?
Yep, that works too. I mean, I had assumed that you all wanted more detail to consider, but if the feeling of the group is that you just prefer not to take it on, that's clear and simple.
I don't think we should take it on at this time, but I'd still like to have more information to understand that I can see this reappearing at some point.
Why would we take this easement for the convenience of the landowner? I just don't see it.
So let me ask a question. So just as a factual question, my impression is that Hunter Lewis bought this land in the last couple of years, and I just
it's 2019.
2019. So are the issues that sort of with historic problems are those surrounding Hunter Lewis or the previous owner? Do we know?
The amendment request was Mr. Lewis.
Within the past 2 years.
Right. But that said, as Dr. Moses pointed out, it's an oddly complicated easement as far as the allocation of divisions and dwellings and all of that. I'll admit, when I brought this to you all, it was the thought that it's just, is already there. It's just a matter of who's administering it and not changing it. But if we're concerned about how it meets the authority's current acceptance standards,
it doesn't.
The resources are good. The terms need more analysis.
As Scott pointed out, really what we're looking at is VOF assigning this easement to this body. We're not looking at renegotiating the easement. VOF kind of really wants to know, would this body be willing to accept the easement? And then if VOF decides to assign it, it's going to be a deed of assignment, a short document that just replaces ACEA in where VOF is. So we just step into VOF shoes. That's the arrangement.
Are we comfortable saying that in the easement's current form that ACA is not comfortable accepting it or responsibility for it?
I would make a motion to that effect if you would like it.
Mr. Chairman, can I just say a couple of things?
Please.
I too tried to go through the 1998 and the 2004 and review it. Started making notes because it is very complicated as far as dwellings and improvements and divisions. And I don't know what has or has not transacted since 98 and 2004. And I appreciate everyone's comments that they've made. And I would just finalize by saying, I would say no for the reason of the VOF, given that they, had this in 98 and 2004, and they've been tracking it ever since, really have the history as to how this goes forward or what future amendments or requests might be. I just think we'd just be starting from scratch. And I appreciate everything that BOF has probably done over all these years, and they've really tracked it, and they've got the foundation to go forward with it, in my opinion.
Thank you. Just good comments.
Is
So,
Sharon going to cut us off in a minute?
Do you want a motion that
We
we
have a
not
motion
accept
on
it
the
at this
floor, don't
time?
we?
let's make him a yes, Chip.
All right, I move that that the ACEA not proceed with accepting not proceed with the discussions with the VOF and the landowner to accept assignment of the easement.
I'll second.
Okay. Is there any discussion?
So just
Peter?
let's just think about one question. We would consider taking the easement if there were amendments to make it.
Correct.
more
We
effective
need to
and
have
consistent.
caveats.
I mean, I just want to put all the paths out there. If
I just think it's difficult because what would happen is we would be assigned the easement. So the easement would exist, it would be in our lap. And then we'd
Okay, I
be in
get
a
it.
position
Yeah,
of having to
sequencing would be hard.
negotiate new changes. And if the landowner doesn't agree to them, we're stuck with the VOF easement. I don't want to say
Okay.
stuck, but that's what we have.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
get
you
it.
know what?
Okay.
We'll accept assignment after amendments have been negotiated.
Okay,
Does that make sense to everybody?
No, I'm not comfortable with saying we will accept it
Oh, I said
under any conditions.
we would consider.
We might.
Yeah.
But I'm not-
Another way to look at that is, if you all vote on and accept Dr. Moses's motion, then the landowner, if he's really determined, can always make another proposal.
Yeah.
You
That's
don't
what I
need
had in
to
mind.
anticipate that. If he wants to come back again and say, okay, well, maybe we'll do it a different way, that's his choice, but you don't need to cover that in your first reaction.
Yeah. No, but definitely a straight assignment's out of the question. All right, so do we have a clear motion?
You need a second.
I second.
Have a
it.
second.
Some
Yeah.
more second it. So.
We lost you for a second, Jay.
Oh, I'm assuming this requires a roll call vote.
Yes, please, that would be good.
Okay.
All right, let's see.
Do you have the sheet? I've lost my sheet.
Yeah, I've got it. All righty.
Just look at the screen.
Right.
All right. Mr. Fennell,
Aye.
Ms. Merrick,
Aye.
Ms. Buttrick is recused. Ms. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Dr. Moses,
Aye.
Mr. Taylor,
I
And we have one recusal. So, okay, that's all right. So that motion passes 6-0 with one recusal.
Excellent.
Right.
All right.
Thank
Is there
you.
any new business? That's a good silence. Any
We need to
old
address
business?
this. We need to address staffing and support at some point, but not tonight.
Right.
Right. And does does
I've
anybody
actually-
know anything, just a quick question, does anybody know anything, the county budget's on the table and there's $0 in there for the ACE program?
Rex and I have been having conversations about this because there's vaguely mentioned money in odd places of the general fund. And we're trying to track down where it's headed. That it was tagged or footnoted ACE in one place, but he couldn't find it in another. So he and I are having conversations about that. And I've reached out to supervisors as well on it.
My understanding is the intent is that there's no new funding for ACE purchases or program admin, and there's also nothing in there about staffing for monitoring.
Okay. So with the retirement of Chess, so there are no replacement plans either?
Richie's probably heard more than I have, but I have heard nothing about filling that position so far.
Okay.
So I spoke to one of our supervisors earlier this afternoon, and the community development department is going to lay out plans on March 16th relating to conservation easements and the ACE program, is my understanding. It has been put on pause, and I gather there was some contention on how they valued development rights. And there's I guess someone took them to task, and so it's currently on pause, but there'll be more information on March 16th.
Well, my only comment is, I think our priority, this body's priority, needs to be stewardship of the easements that we already have. And while I think the ACE program is important and all of that, if dollars are scarce, the dollars need to go to stewardship first.
We've got to monitor
Correct.
and administrate. Yeah. Scott, what do you know about this, the March 16th presentation?
The March 16th presentation is an hour-long presentation from the Director of Community Development about the entire, what's called the Community Development Work Plan, which is all of the mandated work that we do at the board's direction. So it's, about a third or a quarter of our work time pie. So, but that's all of the items on there. It's not just about easements. I suspect that easements will be a very small piece of that overall presentation.
Is the public invited via Zoom?
I think the public is invited to observe, but not to comment. It's a work set. It's a work session only.
Could one of you guys send me that link?
I don't think the link exists yet, but it is on the March 16th agenda.
Okay, I'll head for it then.
The other thing I can add, well, two things I can add. One is we've been asked to provide an assessment of the ACE program for the board in June. So what I'm saying is, if we're talking very briefly about easements as part of a much larger presentation in March, and we're doing a retrospective analysis in June, you can imagine that, and then going into a comp plan review of everything, including our conservation programs, it doesn't give the impression that there's going to be any change soon.
Okay.
And as mentioned, there's nothing new in the budget as far as staffing goes. I will say I am in the process of trying to get, I know this is not the ideal solution, but we are trying to find a way to hire an intern to get back out in the field and doing monitoring soon. That's not as ideal as having permanent professional staff for that, but we do need to get somebody in the field.
I think it's an okay substitute for the time being. I mean, you need somebody.
Right.
So I would like to correct myself. There is public comment at the beginning of the meeting, not through the work session. So if anyone's inclined to offer public comment, it can be done before, at the early portion of the board meeting.
Right.
Great. Thanks, Richie.
So it's
All right, any old business? Well, another fun day on the easement board. Ms. Merrick, thank you for joining the gang. Everybody else, thank you for showing up.
Look forward to meeting you.
Yeah,
Mrs.
in
Merrick.
person someday.
exactly. Until we convene again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Have a great evening.